The dirt beneath Victoria Jensen's boots had turned to powder from 3 years of drought, and the stitches in Wyatt O'Connell's torn work shirt blurred before her eyes as her hands trembled like cottonwood leaves in a storm wind. She pressed her needle through the worn fabric one more time, willing her fingers to steady, but they betrayed her just as they had every single time he brought his mending to her doorstep in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Since that first day in 1877 when he'd knocked on her door with a bashful grin and a pile of clothes that looked like they'd lost a fight with barbed wire. Victoria had been 19 then, fresh from burying her father and taking over his dry goods store on the edge of town. Wyatt had been 22, a ranch hand with kind gray eyes and sun-weathered skin who worked the cattle spreads north of town. He'd heard she did mending work to supplement the store's income, and he needed someone who could handle the brutal wear his profession put on his clothes. What started as a simple business transaction had become a ritual that marked the passage of time more reliably than any calendar. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Wyatt would appear at her counter with his shirts, his trousers, sometimes a torn jacket. They'd exchange pleasantries about the weather, the cattle prices, the latest news from town. He'd pay her fairly, sometimes more than she asked, and she'd promise to have everything ready in a few days. Then he'd leave, and she'd sit in the back room of her store, running her fingers over the fabric he'd worn, imagining the life those shirts had lived against his skin. The shaking had started small, barely noticeable at first. A slight tremor when he handed her his clothes when their fingers accidentally brushed. But over the months and years, it had grown worse, until now, in the summer of 1880, she could barely thread a needle when she knew the shirt belonged to Wyatt O'Connell. Victoria set down her sewing and flexed her fingers, studying them in the lamplight of her small workroom. They were steady now, in this moment without witnesses. Strong hands, capable hands that had learned her father's trade and kept his business alive after pneumonia took him. Hands that could measure fabric, count change, lift heavy bolts of cloth without complaint. But put Wyatt O'Connell in front of her, and those same hands became traitors. The bell above her shop door chimed, and Victoria's heart lurched. It was Tuesday afternoon, which meant Wyatt would be coming to collect his mending. She quickly gathered the 3 shirts she'd finished, folding them with practiced efficiency despite the flutter in her chest. "Miss Jensen." His voice carried through from the front room, warm and familiar as summer rain. "Coming," she called, smoothing her skirt and tucking a strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear. She carried the shirts through the curtain that separated her workspace from the store. Wyatt stood at the counter, hat in hand, dust from the trail still clinging to his boots. He was taller than most men in Las Cruces, with broad shoulders that came from years of hard labor, and a face that had grown more handsome as boyishness gave way to the sharp angles of manhood. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his dark hair needed cutting, falling just past his collar. "Afternoon, Wyatt," Victoria said, pleased that her voice came out steady even if her hands did not. She set the shirts on the counter between them. "Afternoon, Victoria." He'd stopped calling her Miss Jensen about a year ago after she'd insisted it made her feel ancient. "How's business?" "Slow with the heat. People are making do with what they have." She unfolded the top shirt to show him her work. "I reinforced the shoulder seams on this one. You'd torn clean through." Wyatt reached for the shirt and his fingers brushed hers as he took it. Victoria pulled back quickly, but not before the tremor started. She clasped her hands behind her back, hoping he hadn't noticed, but Wyatt had noticed. He'd been noticing for months now, maybe longer. He stood there holding his shirt, looking at her with those storm gray eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't let the moment pass. "Victoria," he said quietly, Why are your hands shaking? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Victoria felt heat flood her cheeks. She could lie, make up some excuse about fatigue or too much coffee, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't asking out of idle curiosity. He was asking because he wanted to know, needed to know. She started, then stopped. How could she explain that his nearness made her heart race and her hands forget how to be steady? That every shirt she mended carried his scent of leather and sage, and she'd breathe it in like a secret? That she'd spent 3 years falling in love with a man who saw her only as the woman who fixed his clothes? "They only shake around you," she finally admitted, the words coming out barely louder than a whisper. "They've been shaking for 3 years, Wyatt. Every time you come in. Every time we talk, I can't seem to control it." Wyatt set the shirt back down on the counter with deliberate care. His expression was unreadable, and Victoria felt panic rising in her throat. She'd ruined everything. He'd take his business elsewhere now, find some other woman to do his mending, and she'd lose even these brief moments that had become the brightest points of her weeks. 3 years, he repeated, and there was wonder in his voice. "You've had shaking hands for 3 years and you never said anything. How could I?" Victoria's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "You're a customer, Wyatt. A good customer who pays on time and never complains about my work. I had no right to burden you with feelings that you didn't ask for and probably don't want." Didn't ask for. Wyatt moved around the counter, and suddenly he was standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Victoria, do you know why I bring my mending to you?" "Because I do good work." Her voice shook now too. "Because 3 years ago I saw you standing in your father's store, brave and scared and determined all at once, and something in my chest just stopped and started again different." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took one of her trembling hands in both of his. "Because I'm a coward who couldn't find the courage to court you proper, so I made up excuses to see you every 2 weeks. Because I tore that last shirt on purpose, Victoria, hoping it would give me a reason to stay longer." Victoria stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "You tore your shirt on purpose, caught it on a fence nail, and just kept pulling." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Felt foolish doing it, but I was desperate. I've been trying for months to work up the nerve to ask if I could take you to dinner, or for a walk, or anywhere that wasn't across this counter with mending between us. I thought you saw me as just the woman who fixes your clothes," Victoria said, and a laugh bubbled up through her shock. "I've been mending your shirts with shaking hands and hoping you'd never notice how I felt." "I noticed." Wyatt's thumbs traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and remarkably, the trembling began to ease. "I noticed everything about you, Victoria. How you bite your bottom lip when you're concentrating. How you know every customer's name and ask after their families. How you sold Mrs. Patterson fabric at half price when her husband lost work, and pretended it was old stock you needed to clear out. I noticed all of it, and I fell a little more in love with you every single time." The word love seemed to echo in the quiet store. Victoria's free hand came up to rest against Wyatt's chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her palm. 3 years, she said again, shaking her head in disbelief. "We wasted 3 years. Then let's not waste another day." Wyatt released her hand only to cup her face gently, tilting it up toward his. "Victoria Jensen, would you do me the honor of letting me court you proper? Dinner, walks, Sunday services together, all of it?" "Yes." The word came out on a breath, and then Wyatt was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect. Victoria's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and they were steady, finally steady, because she was holding on to something real instead of just dreaming about it. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you I have 4 more shirts at the ranch that need mending." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and free. "Bring them by. But from now on you'll have to stay and talk to me while I work. I'm tired of mending your shirts alone." "Yes, madam," Wyatt said, his smile wide enough to crease the corners of his eyes. "Though I should warn you, my talking might make your hands shake worse. I think I'm willing to risk it." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, hands intertwined, and Victoria thought about all the shirts she'd mended over 3 years, all the careful stitches she'd sewn while dreaming of something more. She'd fixed torn seams and replaced missing buttons, patched elbows and reinforced collars, and never once imagined that the man who wore those shirts was falling in love with her too. Over the following weeks, Wyatt made good on his promise. He came to the store not just for mending but for morning coffee, afternoon conversations, evening walks when Victoria closed up shop. Las Cruces was small enough that everyone noticed the change, and the town gossips had plenty to say about the cowboy and the shopkeeper who'd been dancing around each other for years. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, cornered Victoria at the general store one Saturday morning. "About time that O'Connell boy worked up his courage. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you both in a room together." Victoria felt herself blush but couldn't suppress her smile. "We were both being foolish. That's what love does to people," Mrs. Patterson said sagely. "Makes smart folks act like they've lost their minds. But you're good together. Everyone can see it." They were good together. Wyatt taught Victoria to ride, taking her out to see the ranch where he worked on Sunday afternoons. The double-bar tea spread covered thousands of acres north of Las Cruces, owned by a quiet widower named Thomas Bradford who treated his hands fair and paid them decent wages. Wyatt had worked his way up from general cowhand to foreman over the years, and he clearly loved the work despite its hardships. "This is what I see every day," Wyatt said one afternoon, sitting beside Victoria on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The land stretched out before them in shades of gold and brown, broken by the dark green of scattered junipers and the silver ribbon of a creek bed. Cattle dotted the landscape like moving boulders. "Sun comes up over those mountains, and I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "It's beautiful, harsh but beautiful. That's New Mexico for you." Wyatt's arm came around her waist, holding her close. "Your father, did he grow up here?" "No, he came from Missouri after my mother died. I was just a baby." Victoria had few memories of that time, just fragments and stories. He wanted a fresh start somewhere new, and Las Cruces was far enough away to feel like a different world. "He built the store from nothing, made a good life for us. You miss him. Every day. But I think he'd be happy for me. For us." She turned to look up at Wyatt. "He always liked you, said you were one of the honest ones." Wyatt pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm going to marry you, Victoria Jensen, soon as I can afford to give you the life you deserve." "I don't need much," Victoria protested. "Just you." "You deserve everything." His voice was firm. "A proper house, security, a future that's not all hard work and scraping by. I'm saving every penny I can, and Mr. Bradford has been hinting about selling me some land if I can put together enough for a down payment. I want to build something that's ours, Victoria, a ranch we can grow together." The determination in his voice made Victoria's heart swell. "How long have you been planning this?" "About 3 years, Wyatt admitted with a sheepish grin. "Give or take." Summer shifted into fall, and the heat that had baked Las Cruces finally broke. The cottonwoods along the Rio Grande turned gold, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at winter to come. Victoria's store did better business as people prepared for colder weather. and Wyatt worked long hours helping move cattle to lower pastures. They still saw each other whenever possible, stealing moments between work and responsibility. Wyatt would stop by the store on his way into town, often bringing small gifts. Wildflowers tied with string, a smooth stone from the creek, once a tiny carved horse he'd whittled during a slow afternoon watching cattle. Victoria treasured each one, lining them up on the shelf in her workroom like precious artifacts. She still mended his shirts, but now he sat with her while she worked, telling her stories about his day or reading aloud from the newspaper. Her hands never shook anymore, not when he was near. She'd grown comfortable in his presence, in the way his fingers would play with strands of her hair, in how his voice dropped low and warm when he said her name. In October, Thomas Bradford called Wyatt into his office at the ranch house. Victoria was visiting that afternoon, waiting on the porch with a basket of mending when Wyatt emerged looking stunned. "What happened?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. Wyatt sat down heavily beside her, turning to take both her hands in his. "Mr. Bradford is selling me 200 acres on the eastern edge of the property. Prime grazing land with water access." "Wyatt, that's wonderful." Victoria threw her arms around his neck, nearly toppling them both off the bench. "You've been working toward this for so long. There's more." Wyatt's hands came up to steady her, holding her close. "He's giving me a good price, fair terms, and he said I can run my own herd while still working as foreman until I'm established enough to go full-time on my own place. Victoria, this is everything I've been dreaming about. Everything I needed to build a future." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, and Victoria saw joy and nervousness warring in his expression. "Marry me," Wyatt said. "I know we've only been courting proper for a few months, but I've loved you for 3 years. I want to build this ranch with you, build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see you beside me. I want to grow old fixing fence and raising cattle and maybe a few kids if we're blessed. Say yes, Victoria. Please say yes." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, happy tears that blurred Wyatt's anxious expression. "Yes," she managed to say through her crying and laughing. "Yes, of course yes. I've loved you since the first time you brought me your mending, and I'll love you the rest of my life." Wyatt kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they finally broke apart, Mr. Bradford was standing in the doorway of the ranch house with a knowing smile. "I take it she said yes," the older man called. "She said yes." Wyatt shouted back, standing and pulling Victoria up with him, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. They were married 6 weeks later, on a crisp November morning in the small church on the edge of Las Cruces. Victoria wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to her mother. Wyatt stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair freshly cut, looking nervous and handsome and absolutely perfect. The church was full of townspeople who'd watched their long courtship with patient amusement. Mr. Bradford stood as Wyatt's best man, and Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes as the minister led them through their vows. When Wyatt slipped a simple gold band onto Victoria's finger and promised to love her all his days, Victoria's hands were steady as stone. They held a reception at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Victoria waltzed with her new husband while their friends clapped and cheered, and she thought her heart might burst from pure happiness. "Mrs. O'Connell," Wyatt murmured in her ear as they swayed together. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Victoria admitted. "Though I'll keep Jensen for the store. People know it, and I don't want to confuse my customers." "Whatever you want, as long as you're mine." They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house since their own home was not yet built, but Victoria didn't mind. Wrapped in Wyatt's arms, learning the geography of her husband's body as he learned hers, she felt completely content. This was what she dreamed of during all those lonely evenings mending his shirts, though the reality was far sweeter than any dream. The next morning, they began their life together in earnest. Victoria continued running her store in town, while Wyatt worked on building their ranch house on the land Mr. Bradford had sold him. He'd hired a carpenter to help with the construction, and several of the ranch hands volunteered their time on weekends to speed the work. Victoria would close the store early on Fridays and ride out to see the progress, bringing food and supplies. She watched their home take shape board by board, from foundation to frame to walls and roof. It was a simple structure, 2 stories with a wide porch and large windows to catch the light, but to Victoria, it was a palace. "Kitchen goes here," Wyatt would explain, walking her through rooms that were still just skeletal frames. "Big enough for a proper table where we can eat together. And upstairs, 3 bedrooms. One for us, and maybe someday we'll fill the others." By January 1881, the house was finished enough to move into, though Wyatt continued to add touches as winter progressed. Victoria sold her father's store to a young couple moving to Las Cruces from Santa Fe, using the money to buy furniture and supplies for their ranch. It felt bittersweet to let go of the business her father had built, but she knew he would have approved. She was building something new now, something that honored his memory by moving forward instead of staying frozen in the past. The first night in their new home, Wyatt carried Victoria over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It's tradition," he insisted, setting her down gently in the parlor. "Besides, I like any excuse to hold you." They made dinner together in their new kitchen, a simple meal of beef and beans that tasted like celebration. Afterward, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge over their land. "Happy?" Wyatt asked, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Perfectly," Victoria said, and meant it with her whole heart. The months that followed were hard work, but good work. Wyatt built up his herd slowly, buying quality cattle when he could afford them and running them alongside Mr. Bradford's stock on the shared range. Victoria took in sewing and mending from the neighboring ranches, building a reputation for quality work that kept her busy. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future, for the day when Wyatt could run his ranch full-time. In March, Victoria began feeling sick in the mornings. At first she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when the nausea persisted for weeks, Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside during a visit to town. "How long since your last monthly?" the older woman asked bluntly. Victoria blinked, mentally counting back, and felt her eyes go wide. 6 weeks, maybe 7, you're pregnant, honey." Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "I've seen enough expectant mothers to recognize the signs. Have you told Wyatt?" "I didn't know for certain myself until just now." Victoria pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, wonder blooming through her. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." She rode home that afternoon with the secret burning bright inside her. Wyatt was working on repairing a section of fence when she arrived, and he looked up with his usual welcoming smile. "You're home early," he called, setting down his tools and walking over to help her dismount. "Everything all right? Everything's perfect." Victoria slid down from her horse and into his arms. "Wyatt, I have something to tell you." He must have heard something in her voice because his expression shifted to concern. "What is it? Are you sick?" "You've been looking pale lately. I should have insisted you see the doctor." "I'm not sick," Victoria interrupted, taking his hands and placing them on her stomach. "I'm pregnant." "We're going to have a baby, Wyatt, sometime in October if Mrs. Patterson's guess is right." Wyatt stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then, slowly, A smile spread across his face, brilliant as sunrise. "A baby, we're having a baby." "Yes," Victoria laughed, and then Wyatt was lifting her up and spinning her around, whooping loud enough to startle the horses. "I'm going to be a father," he shouted to the empty range. "Do you hear that, world? I'm going to be a father." He set Victoria down carefully, suddenly anxious. "Should I not have spun you? Is that bad for the baby? You should sit down, rest. Let me get you water, Wyatt." Victoria caught his face between her hands, still laughing. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I can handle being spun around by my overexcited husband." But Wyatt was already in full protective mode. For the rest of her pregnancy, he fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she not lift anything heavy or ride too far or work too hard. Victoria found it alternately endearing and exasperating, but she couldn't truly be annoyed. His joy over the coming baby was too pure, too absolute. He talked to her growing belly at night, telling their child about the ranch, about the life they'd have together. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth as silk so there wouldn't be any rough edges. He painted the smallest bedroom a soft yellow, saying it would work whether they had a son or daughter. Summer came hot and dry, and Victoria spent the worst of the heat resting in the shade of their porch, sewing baby clothes and blankets. Neighboring ranch wives would stop by to visit, bringing gifts and advice. Mrs. Bradford, who'd raised 3 sons before illness took her, sent over a box of baby things her boys had outgrown. The community around Las Cruces was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and Victoria felt supported by the web of relationships Wyatt had built over his years working the ranches. People were generous with their time and knowledge, helping the young couple prepare for parenthood. In early October, Victoria woke in the pre-dawn darkness with the first pains. She shook Wyatt awake, trying to stay calm. "It's time," she said simply. Wyatt bolted upright, instantly awake and panicked. "Now, but the baby's not due for another week. Are you sure? Should I get the doctor?" "I'll get the doctor. Don't move, Wyatt." Victoria gripped his hand, breathing through a contraction. "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them. Yes, get the doctor, but first help me downstairs." The next 12 hours were the longest of Victoria's life. Dr. Mitchell arrived, a calm presence who delivered half the babies in the county. Mrs. Patterson came to help, and another neighbor woman named Sarah who had 5 children of her own. They shooed Wyatt out of the bedroom over his protests. "This is women's work," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You go boil water and pace like men are supposed to do." Victoria could hear Wyatt wearing a path in the floor below as her labor progressed. The pain was worse than anything she'd imagined, waves of it that left her gasping and gripping Mrs. Patterson's hand. But Sarah talked her through it, calm and encouraging, and Dr. Mitchell monitored everything with practiced efficiency. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom windows, Victoria gave one last tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It's a boy," Dr. Mitchell announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. "A healthy baby boy, Mrs. O'Connell." They cleaned the baby and wrapped him in blankets, then placed him in Victoria's arms. She stared down at her son in wonder, taking in his tiny features, his shock of dark hair, his perfect little fingers that gripped hers instinctively. "Let me get the father before he wears a hole in your floor," Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. Wyatt appeared in the doorway moments later, looking terrified and hopeful. "Victoria, are you all right?" "I'm wonderful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Come meet your son." Wyatt approached the bed like he was walking on holy ground. When he looked down at the baby in Victoria's arms, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," Wyatt whispered. "He's absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Victoria carefully transferred their son into Wyatt's arms, showing him how to support the head. Wyatt cradled the baby against his chest, and Victoria fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him gaze at their child with such pure adoration. "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They discussed names for months but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's face, Victoria knew what felt right. "James," Wyatt said softly, and Victoria nodded. "James Jensen O'Connell, after your father." "Papa would have liked that," Victoria said, wiping at her own tears. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. James was a good baby, healthy and hungry, but he still demanded attention around the clock. Victoria and Wyatt took turns walking him when he fussed at night, both of them bleary-eyed but happy. Wyatt proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and singing lullabies with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He'd come in from working the ranch and make straight for the cradle, scooping up James and talking to him about his day as if the baby could understand every word. "You should have seen the new calf today, James," Wyatt would say, walking the baby around the kitchen while Victoria prepared dinner. "Pretty little heifer, going to be a fine addition to the herd. Someday you'll help me work these cattle, learn the business from the ground up." Victoria would listen to these one-sided conversations and smile. Wyatt was already planning their son's future, dreaming of the ranch they'd build together as a family. Winter came mild that year, which was a blessing with a new baby in the house. James grew fast, hitting all his milestones right on schedule. By his first birthday, he was walking, babbling words that sounded almost like mama and dada, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of toddlerhood. The ranch continued to grow too. Wyatt's herd increased steadily, and he was able to hire a young ranch hand named Tom to help with the daily work. This freed up more of Wyatt's time to spend with Victoria and James, though he still put in long days during calving season and roundup. Victoria took up her sewing business again when James was old enough, working during his nap times and in the evenings. The extra income helped, and she enjoyed the work, the satisfaction of creating something useful with her hands. She still mended Wyatt's shirts, though now with James playing at her feet instead of sitting alone in a back room dreaming of what might be. On a spring evening in 1883, with James playing with wooden blocks on the floor and dinner simmering on the stove, Wyatt came in from the barn looking thoughtful. "Mr. Bradford stopped by today," he said, washing up at the kitchen basin. "He's thinking of retiring, selling the double-bar tea." Victoria looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of James's this time. "Selling the whole ranch, everything. Land, cattle, buildings. He's getting too old to manage it all, and his sons moved east years ago." Wyatt dried his hands and came to sit beside her. "He offered it to me first before putting it on the market." "That's a tremendous opportunity," Victoria said slowly. "But can we afford it? Not all of it, no, but I've been thinking." Wyatt picked up James, settling their son on his lap. "What if we partnered with a few other ranchers? Pool our resources, buy the place together, run it as a cooperative. We'd own shares proportional to our investment, split the profits fairly. It would expand our operation significantly without bankrupting any one family." Victoria considered this, her mind working through the implications. "Who would manage the day-to-day operations?" "I would, same as I've been doing as foreman, but the major decisions would be made jointly by all the partners." Wyatt bounced James gently. "It's risky, bringing in partners, but it's also smart, spreading out the financial burden and the work." "What do you think?" "I think you should talk to the other ranchers, see who's interested," Victoria said. "But only with people you trust, Wyatt. people who'll deal honestly and work hard. Over the next several weeks, Wyatt approached 3 other ranchers he respected. Tom Crawford, who ran a small but successful operation south of town; Henry Martinez, whose family had been ranching in New Mexico for generations; and Robert Sullivan, a former cavalry officer who'd settled in Las Cruces after his military service ended. All 3 were interested, and after much negotiation they worked out an agreement. By summer, the partnership was official. The 4 families purchased the Double Bar T together, merging their herds and resources. It was a massive undertaking, requiring careful coordination and a lot of trust. But Wyatt had chosen his partners well. Tom, Henry, and Robert were all honest men committed to making the venture succeed. Victoria found herself part of a larger community now, working alongside the other wives to support their husband's business. They'd gather for meals, watch each other's children, share the work of maintaining such a large operation. It was different from the quiet life she and Wyatt had built, but Victoria adapted, finding her place in this new arrangement. James thrived with other children around. The Crawford family had twin daughters his age, and the Martinez family had a whole brood ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Robert Sullivan's wife was pregnant with their first child, due in the fall. The ranch became a bustling, lively place full of activity and noise and life. 2 years passed in this way, the partnership growing stronger as they learned to work together effectively. The ranch prospered, and each family's share of the profits grew accordingly. Wyatt was able to invest in better breeding stock, improve their section of the range, even build an addition onto their house. In the summer of 1885, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. James was nearly 4 now, eager and energetic, and the thought of adding another child to their family filled Victoria with joy. Wyatt was thrilled, immediately launching into protective mode again, much to Victoria's amused exasperation. "I've done this before," she reminded him when he tried to carry her up the stairs like she was made of porcelain. "I know what to expect." "Doesn't mean I'm going to stop taking care of you," Wyatt said stubbornly. "That's my job as your husband." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Victoria knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was simply too busy with James and the ranch to worry about every twinge. She continued her normal activities well into her 7th month, only slowing down when the summer heat became oppressive. In February 1886, Victoria went into labor during a cold snap that had frosted the windows with ice. Dr. Mitchell was there, as was Mrs. Patterson and Sarah, the same team that had helped deliver James. This time the labor went faster, and by early evening Victoria was holding a daughter. "A girl," Victoria breathed, looking down at her daughter's tiny face. "Wyatt, we have a daughter." Wyatt, who'd been allowed in the room this time since he'd promised not to faint or get in the way, knelt beside the bed with tears in his eyes. "She's beautiful. She looks just like you." They named her Sarah Rose after the woman who'd helped deliver her and for the wild roses that grew along the creek on their property. James, allowed in to meet his sister, stared at her with wide eyes. "Baby," he said uncertainly. "Yes, this is your baby sister," Victoria told him. "You're going to be her big brother, help take care of her." James considered this, then very gently patted Sarah's head with one finger. "My baby," he declared, and everyone laughed. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. James was protective of his sister from the start, always wanting to help with her care. Wyatt juggled ranch work with fatherhood, somehow finding time for both. Victoria marveled at the life they'd built, so different from those lonely days mending shirts and dreaming of what might be. The partnership continued to thrive. They'd expanded their holdings, bought neighboring land as it became available, built their reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. The four families worked well together, their children growing up almost like cousins, their wives becoming close friends. But nothing good lasts forever unchanged, and in the spring of 1888, Tom Crawford was thrown from his horse during a storm and broke his back. He survived but would never walk again, and his wife Margaret made the painful decision to sell their share of the ranch and move back east to be near her family. It was a blow to the partnership, losing Tom's steady presence. But the three remaining families absorbed the Crawford share, dividing it among themselves and adjusting their arrangement. They helped Margaret and Tom pack, threw them a farewell party, and promised to write. "Things change," Wyatt said the night after the Crawfords left, holding Victoria close in bed. "People move on, life shifts, but we're still here, still building something good." "I know," Victoria said, though she felt the loss of Margaret's friendship keenly. "We'll adapt like we always do." And they did adapt. The ranch continued to operate smoothly with 3 families instead of 4. James, now 7, started helping with small chores around the ranch, feeding chickens and gathering eggs and learning to ride under his father's patient instruction. Sarah, at 2, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who kept Victoria constantly on her toes. In 1890, Victoria found herself pregnant once more, a surprise at 32, though not an unwelcome one. Wyatt was delighted, James was excited about another sibling, and Sarah was too young to fully understand but seemed to sense something important was happening. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. Victoria was older now, and she felt every ache and pain more acutely. Dr. Mitchell monitored her carefully, warning her to rest more, not to overexert herself. Victoria tried to follow his advice, but with 2 active children and a ranch to help run, complete rest was impossible. In December, during the first real cold snap of winter, Victoria went into labor 6 weeks early. Wyatt rode for the doctor in a panic while Mrs. Patterson stayed with Victoria, trying to keep her calm. "Too soon," Victoria gasped between contractions. "The baby's coming too soon." "Babies come when they're ready," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, echoing the words she'd used years ago. "Early ones can be fighters. You just focus on breathing." Dr. Mitchell arrived as snow began to fall, and he worked quickly, his expression serious. The labor was fast but frightening, and when the baby finally arrived, tiny and silent, Victoria's heart stopped. Then a weak cry filled the room, and Dr. Mitchell smiled. "She's small but breathing. A little fighter, just like her mother." They named her Grace Ellen, because her survival felt like Grace and Ellen had been Victoria's mother's name. She was so tiny she fit in Wyatt's 2 hands, but her lungs were strong, and her grip surprisingly fierce when Victoria placed a finger in her palm. "She's going to make it, Doctor," Mitchell said after examining Grace thoroughly. "She'll need extra care, extra warmth, plenty of feeding, but I've seen smaller babies than this survive and thrive. You've got a strong one here." Grace did survive, growing slowly but steadily. She remained small for her age, delicate where Sarah had been robust, but her spirit was indomitable. By her first birthday, she'd caught up to where she should have been developmentally, and by 2, she was keeping pace with other children her age. The 1890s brought changes to Las Cruces and the surrounding ranches. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle to market. New settlers arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. The wild, rough edges of the frontier began to smooth out as civilization took firmer root. Through it all, the O'Connell family and their partners continued to build and grow. Wyatt proved to be a shrewd businessman as well as a skilled rancher, making smart decisions that benefited everyone in the partnership. Victoria managed their household and finances with the same efficiency she'd once brought to her father's store, stretching every dollar and ensuring nothing was wasted. James grew into a capable young man, tall like his father with his mother's honey-colored hair. At 15, he could work alongside the adult ranch hands, and Wyatt relied on him more and more. Sarah, at 12, was developing into a skilled rider with a gift for working with horses. Grace, despite her difficult start, was a healthy 10-year-old with her mother's head for numbers and her father's determination. In 1898, Wyatt sat with Victoria on their porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching Grace to throw a rope while Sarah practiced barrel patterns on her favorite mare. 21 years, Wyatt said, taking Victoria's hand. 21 years since I first brought you my torn shirt and tried not to stare too obviously at the prettiest woman in Las Cruces. Victoria laughed, lacing her fingers through his. I thought I was so good at hiding how I felt. My shaking hands gave me away. Best thing that ever happened to me, asking about those shaking hands. Wyatt brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Led me to ask the question I should have asked 3 years earlier. We got there eventually, Victoria said. And look at what we built. She gestured at the ranch spread out before them, the sturdy house they'd added onto over the years, the barns and corrals and pastures full of cattle. Beyond that, their children, healthy and happy and loved. And beside her, the man who'd brought her torn shirts and stolen her heart, who'd loved her steadily through all the years and all the changes. I'd build it all again, Wyatt said. Every fence, every building, every hard day and sleepless night, worth it 1,000 times over to end up right here with you. Romantic fool, Victoria teased, but her eyes were wet. You're romantic fool, Wyatt corrected. Until the day I die and beyond if there's anything after. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, and Victoria thought about the girl she'd been at 19, scared and alone, taking over her father's store and trying to be brave. She thought about the shy cowboy who'd needed his shirts mended and been too nervous to say what he really wanted. All those careful stitches she'd sewn, all those trembling hands and secret dreams. They'd led her here, to this porch, this life, this love. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it. The new century arrived, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. The partnership decided to incorporate officially, forming the O'Connell-Martinez-Sullivan Cattle Company with proper legal documentation and clear succession plans. James, now 18, joined the business officially, learning the administrative side from his father while continuing to work the range. Henry Martinez's eldest son, Miguel, was the same age as James, and the two young men became close friends and business partners. Robert Sullivan's son, David, was a year younger, and the three of them represented the future of the ranch. They brought new ideas and energy, respecting the foundation their fathers had built while pushing for innovations. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to train horses professionally. Wyatt was skeptical at first, but after watching his daughter work, he recognized her genuine talent. They set aside a section of the ranch for her use, and Sarah began building a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult horses. Grace, meanwhile, showed an aptitude for the business side of ranching. At 14, she was already helping Victoria manage the ranch's accounts, and she talked about someday going to college to study business. It was an unconventional dream for a young woman in 1902, but Wyatt and Victoria supported it wholeheartedly. Times are changing, Victoria told Grace when she worried about her ambitions being too bold. Women are doing more, being more. If you want an education, we'll find a way to make it happen. In 1905, James married a woman named Catherine from Santa Fe, a teacher's daughter with a quick mind and a kind heart. The wedding was a grand affair, bringing together not just the ranch families but friends from all over the territory. Victoria watched her son exchange vows and remembered her own wedding day, the joy and hope that had filled her heart. 2 years later, Sarah shocked everyone by falling in love with Miguel Martinez. The two families had been partners for decades, and the young couple had grown up together, but no one had noticed when friendship shifted into something deeper. When Miguel asked Wyatt's permission to court Sarah, Wyatt gave it with a smile. "The Martinez family is good people," he told Sarah. "Miguel is a fine young man. If he makes you happy, then I'm happy." They were married in 1908, a union that strengthened the bond between the two families even further. Grace served as maid of honor, and James stood as one of Miguel's groomsmen, and the whole ranch celebrated for 3 days straight. Grace went off to college in 1909, one of only a handful of women in her business program. Victoria missed her youngest daughter terribly, but was fiercely proud of her courage. Grace wrote letters every week, full of details about her classes and her new experiences, and came home during breaks with her head full of ideas for improving the ranch's operations. Robert Sullivan passed away in 1910 after a brief illness that took everyone by surprise. The funeral was well attended, and his wife Eleanor decided to stay on, letting David run their portion of the ranch. Robert's death reminded them all of their mortality, of how precious time was. "We're not young anymore," Wyatt said to Victoria one night. He was 53 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines etched deep around his eyes from years of squinting against the sun. "No, we're not," Victoria agreed. She was 46, her own hair showing gray, her hands showing the wear of decades of work. "But we're here, and we're healthy, and we're together. That's what matters." James and Catherine had their first child in 1911, a son they named Wyatt after his grandfather. Victoria held her grandson and marveled at the passage of time, at how she'd gone from girl to woman to wife to mother to grandmother. The circle of life continuing, generations building on what came before. Sarah and Miguel added to the family in 1912 with twin boys, boisterous and loud and absolutely adored by everyone. Grace came home from college for the birth, bringing her degree and a job offer from a bank in Albuquerque. But after meeting her nephews, she surprised everyone by turning down the job. "I want to come home," she told her parents. "Use what I learned to help the ranch, help the family business. If you'll have me. If we'll have you." Wyatt pulled his daughter into a hug. "Grace, there's nothing I'd like more than having all my children here, working together." So Grace came home and applied her education to modernizing the ranch's business practices. She implemented new accounting systems, negotiated better contracts with buyers, found ways to increase efficiency and profitability. The older generation was impressed, the younger generation inspired. Victoria watched her children and grandchildren with deep satisfaction. This was what she and Wyatt had built, not just a successful ranch but a legacy of family working together, supporting each other, loving each other through good times and hard times. In 1915, as the world beyond New Mexico descended into war, the ranch remained an island of peace and productivity. They sent cattle to help feed soldiers, bought war bonds to support the effort, but their daily lives continued relatively unchanged. James and Miguel were too old for the draft, David just barely under the age limit, and the younger generation still too young. Wyatt stepped back from active management in 1916, officially retiring, though he still spent his days on the ranch, supervising and advising but letting the younger generation make the major decisions. At 59, he'd earned his rest, though he was too active to ever fully retire. Victoria spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them to sew, telling them stories about the old days when Las Cruces was smaller and wilder. She told them about their grandfather bringing her torn shirts, about hands that wouldn't stop shaking, about the power of love to transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1920, the entire family gathered for a celebration. James and Catherine brought their 3 children. Sarah and Miguel had their twins plus 2 daughters. Grace, still unmarried but content, organized the whole event with characteristic efficiency. The party was held at the main ranch house, which had been expanded and renovated over the years but still retained its original character. Music played, food covered tables set up in the yard, and children ran everywhere. It was chaotic and wonderful, exactly the kind of celebration Victoria loved. As evening approached, Wyatt took Victoria's hand and led her away from the crowd to the small rise where they used to sit when they were courting. 40 years, he said, settling beside her on the grass. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. The best 40 years of my life, Victoria said, leaning into his shoulder. Mine too. Wyatt's arm came around her, solid and warm. I meant what I said all those years ago, Victoria. You deserve everything, and I've spent every day trying to give it to you. You gave me everything the day you asked about my shaking hands, Victoria said. Everything else has just been extra blessings. They sat together watching the sun set over the ranch, over the life they'd built together from nothing but hard work and hope and love. Below them, their family celebrated, multiple generations joined together by the choice 2 young people had made to take a chance on each other. No regrets, Wyatt asked. Not a single one, Victoria answered honestly. You. Only that I waited 3 years to tell you how I felt. But then again, maybe we needed that time. Maybe we had to grow into the people we needed to be before we could build this. Victoria considered that and nodded. Maybe you're right. Everything in its time. Everything in its time, Wyatt agreed. They stayed on the rise until stars began to appear, then walked back down to rejoin their family. Their children came to them with hugs and toasts, grandchildren climbed into their laps for stories, and Victoria felt surrounded by love, blessed beyond measure. The years continued to pass, as years do. Wyatt and Victoria grew older gracefully, slowing down but never stopping entirely. They remained active in the ranch and in their grandchildren's lives, present and engaged and interested in everything happening around them. In 1925, Victoria's hands began to shake again, not from nervousness this time but from age. Arthritis crept into her joints, making sewing and fine work difficult. But Wyatt was there to help, just as he'd always been, holding thread for her to see, helping her button difficult fastenings, loving her through every change and challenge. Grace married in 1926, at the age of 40, to a widower banker from Las Cruces, who appreciated her intelligence and independence. The wedding was small but joyful, and Victoria cried happy tears watching her youngest daughter finally find love. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. The family tree grew complex and wonderful, branches spreading in all directions. The ranch continued to prosper under the younger generation's leadership, and Wyatt and Victoria took pride in seeing their life's work continuing and expanding beyond them. In 1930, on a warm spring morning, Wyatt and Victoria sat together on their porch as they had countless times before. Wyatt was 73 now, Victoria 66, both moving slowly but still clear-headed and content. "You know what I was thinking about," Wyatt said, holding Victoria's hand gently to avoid aggravating her arthritis. "What's that?" "That first shirt you mended for me. I still have it, you know. Up in the attic, wrapped in paper. I could never bring myself to throw it away." Victoria smiled. "I remember that shirt. You'd torn it so badly I wasn't sure I could fix it, but I did, because I wanted any excuse to see you again. I'm glad you did. I'm glad for every shirt you mended, every conversation we had across that counter, every moment that led us here." Wyatt squeezed her hand carefully. "Best 3 years of waiting I ever did, even though I was too much of a fool to know I was waiting." "We were both fools," Victoria said fondly. "But we found our way eventually." James came riding up to the house then, dismounting and climbing the porch steps. He was 49 now, managing the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown. "Just wanted to check on you both," James said. "Make sure you're comfortable." "We're fine, son," Wyatt assured him. "Just enjoying the morning." James nodded, but Victoria could see the concern in his eyes. Her children worried about them, she knew, watching them age and slow down. But there was nothing to be done about time except meet it with grace. After James left, Wyatt turned to Victoria with serious eyes. "I want you to know something. Whatever happens, however many days or years we have left, I've loved you every single one of them. From the moment I saw you in your father's store until right now, and I'll love you beyond the end of everything." "I know," Victoria said, tears rising. "I've always known, Wyatt, just like you've always known how much I love you." They sat together in the warm sun, hands intertwined, and Victoria thought about the journey they'd traveled together. From shaking hands and torn shirts to this porch, this life, this overwhelming abundance of love and family and belonging. It had been hard sometimes, painful sometimes, but always, always worth it. The seasons continued their rotation. Summer came hot and dry, then fall brought cooler temperatures and the work of roundup. Winter settled gentle over the ranch, and spring arrived with new calves and new growth. Wyatt and Victoria watched it all from their porch, content in each other's company. In the summer of 1932, Wyatt fell ill with pneumonia. At 75, his body couldn't fight it off like a younger man's would. Dr. Mitchell, himself in his 70s now, did what he could, but they all knew the likely outcome. Victoria stayed by Wyatt's bedside around the clock, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of their life together. Their children came, and their grandchildren, and even some of the great-grandchildren, saying goodbye to the patriarch of their family. On a quiet evening in August, with Victoria beside him and his family filling the house, Wyatt O'Connell took his last breath. He went peacefully, holding Victoria's hand, his last word her name. The funeral drew people from all over New Mexico. Wyatt had touched many lives over his 75 years, and they came to honor his memory. Victoria stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said farewell to the man who'd been her partner, her love, her everything for 51 years. The grief was enormous, a physical weight that pressed down on her. But Victoria endured because that's what Wyatt would have wanted. She continued living in their house, cared for by her family, still involved in the ranch operations as much as her health allowed. She spent her remaining years surrounded by the family she and Wyatt had created, telling stories about their life together to anyone who would listen. She wanted them to know, to understand how a simple question about shaking hands had led to all of this. The ranch, the family, the legacy of love that would continue long after she was gone. Victoria Jensen O'Connell passed away in her sleep in the winter of 1935, at the age of 71. Her children found her in her bed, peaceful and still, with a smile on her face. On her bedside table was the shirt Wyatt had mentioned, the first one she'd ever mended for him, carefully preserved all these years. They buried her next to Wyatt, on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, but beneath was carved, "Together forever as we always were." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. James and his children ran it, then his grandchildren, each generation building on what came before. The name changed over time, updated and modernized, but at its heart, it remained the O'Connell-Martinez-Sullivan Ranch, a testament to partnership and family and hard work. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set golden over the New Mexico landscape, workers would swear they could see two figures sitting on the old hill, hands intertwined, watching over the land they loved. Whether it was just tricks of the light or something more, no one could say for certain. But the story lived on, passed down through the family. The story of the cowboy and the shopkeeper, of torn shirts and shaking hands, of love that waited patiently and then bloomed into something extraordinary. Victoria's great-great-grandchildren would sit on the porch of the ranch house and listen to the tale, marveling at how a simple question had changed everything. "Why are your hands shaking?" Wyatt had asked, and Victoria had answered with the truth that set them both free to love. It was a story about courage and honesty, about the power of acknowledging feelings instead of hiding them. It was a story about building something together, brick by brick and year by year, until you'd created not just a life but a legacy. Most of all, it was a story about love, patient and enduring, tested and true, strong enough to span decades and generations. The ranch stood as physical proof of what two people could accomplish when they worked together, loved together, faced whatever challenges came their way together. From those first trembling hands to that final peaceful rest, Victoria and Wyatt had lived a love story for the ages, one that would inspire their descendants for generations to come. And in the attic of the old ranch house, carefully preserved in a cedar chest, that first mended shirt remained, every stitch a testament to love, every patch a promise kept. It was just a shirt, worn and faded and old, but it represented the beginning of everything. A family, a ranch, a love that even death couldn't diminish. The Wild West had been tamed over the decades, civilization replacing frontier roughness, but some things remained constant. The land endured. Family endured. And love, true love like Victoria and Wyatt had shared, endured beyond everything, written into the very foundation of the ranch they'd built and the family they'd created. Their story became legend in Las Cruces, told and retold until no one could quite remember where truth ended and embellishment began. But the heart of it remained unchanged. A woman with shaking hands, a cowboy brave enough to ask why, and the lifetime of happiness that followed when they stopped hiding and started loving. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, celebrated, passed down through the ages as an example of what love could be when two people were willing to be vulnerable, to take risks, to build something together from nothing but hope and determination and faith in each other. And so the story lived on, as immortal as the land itself, a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments lead to the greatest changes, that sometimes all it takes is the courage to ask a simple question and the honesty to answer it truthfully. Why are your hands shaking? Because I love you, and I have for 3 years, and I was afraid you'd never feel the same. In the end, it all came down to that. Love acknowledged, love spoken, love lived out in daily choices and yearly commitments, in hard work and tender moments, in building a life and a family and a future together. That was the legacy Victoria and Wyatt left behind, more valuable than any ranch or fortune, more enduring than any monument. Their love story, born from torn shirts and trembling hands, bloomed into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the transformative power of honesty and courage, and two hearts willing to take a chance on forever.